Hi, this is Kukjae Headhunter here in Seoul, and this is a video of a webinar that I did last week with the Entrpreneurs Collective based in the UK, an organisation that brings together startup founders and investors. The subject of the video is about the Korean experience of COVID-19 in the course of this year so far, and with regard to the situation in the UK and other countries. Hope you like the video, and see you again soon. 안녕하세요. Kukjae Headhunter입니다.
We have a few slides from them, as well as we will then open it up to the audience to receive questions from them. Daniel. Okay, so today we're very fortunate to be joined by Gordon Dudley from RDI Korea, and also by Sean Blakeley, who is the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Korea, but also, fortunately for him, my brother. So quite handy to have him to be in such a country which is fair to say is very much leading on the response to COVID. Before we go into the main presentation, so I'd love to introduce you guys and for you guys to say a few words about yourself and your companies. Gordon, why don't you kick us off?
All right, thanks, Mike. So as you heard from Mike, my name is Gordon Dudley, and I'm heading up the company RDI Worldwide here in Korea. Actually, from what Mike explained, the mission of Entrpreneurs Collective is actually very similar to our mission at RDI Worldwide, in the sense that we are involved in HR consulting services, and we're supporting global companies operating in Korea to work better with their people. And that is providing services, everything from talent acquisition, recruiting, right through to corporate culture design, leadership training, and all kinds of professional training that comes in between. That's, for me, based on the fact that I've now been in Korea for almost 10 years. So I've been running RDI for about half of that time. And the other half of that time, I was working for one of Korea's largest companies. And it was that experience that made me realize that although these days we feel that we operate in a digitalized, fully globalized world, that we feel fully connected a lot of the time, that actually when it comes down to work specifically in a multicultural environment, that it's still incredibly difficult to work fully friction-free and smoothly. So that was a lot of the kind of the mission behind why we set up RDI a little bit over 4 years ago. So hopefully through this call today, I can just give some insights into what it's like being a British person living in Korea when it comes to the experience that we've had over the last few months, and also what it is to be a businessman running a small business here over the last few years. So looking forward to plenty of questions following the presentations later. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Gordon. So over to you, Sean. Can you tell us a little bit about the chamber and what you guys do over there?
Yeah. So hello, everyone, and thank you, Mike, for inviting me to speak today. So a little bit about myself. So I've been in Korea now about close to 15 years. Studied here, worked in a Korean organization here, worked in a British consultancy firm, and now I've been running the chamber for 5 years. My main specialty is supporting SMEs, anything from startup to medium-sized organizations to enter the Korean market or also other Northeast Asian markets, but primarily the Korean market, and then also to support multinationals that are based here in Korea. So what does the chamber do? Well, exactly that. So the first thing we do is potentially help some of Michael's members to enter this market, and we're supported by the government to do that. And then secondly, if you already are in the market, and usually that tends to be on the larger, more medium to larger organizations, then we help to promote their businesses, help them network, but also help them advocate on a policy which allows for business fair practice, which sometimes can be challenging in foreign markets. And so, yeah, you can think of us as a sort of business connector or multiplier. So I think my next role is to tell you a little bit about where Korea is in terms of COVID. So shall I begin that? So I have a few slides, and I'll keep them short, and I'm more than happy for Michael to share those when this is finished. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. The things I will caveat very heavily is that obviously I'm not a medical expert, so I'm telling you probably a little bit above what you might find in the British media, but not too much more. So please bear that in mind as I'm explaining. So the first two things that you see here, if you look at where Korea is in terms of dates, I think you can see that it's quite small, but Korea really began in earnest to deal with this a lot earlier than the UK. So you're talking now, actually it began in late January, but then really in February is when things started to pick up, and you can see it spiked towards the first week of March, and it actually has spiked at around 1,100 and odd cases, and so it's very much on the downward trend now. And I think as of yesterday there were only 8 cases. Now bear in mind, this is not 8 deaths, this is 8 active cases, and so 8 new cases, and there are still a lot of active cases, but that is obviously going down. So you can see the total cases now has started to plateau, and then the new cases has really rapidly gone down. So as of yesterday, the Korean government instituted what is the first phase of social distancing reduction, which I won't go into too much, but it basically allows for people to start going to gyms. Korea has never had a full lockdown, and so you've always been able to go shopping and always been able to go to your office, but it is now starting to institute, I guess, what you would consider slightly more liberal social distancing policies, but still well ahead of that of the UK. If you flick to the next slide,
Sean, just to interject a little bit there, I think maybe at this point it's also worth reminding, because I guess the epicenter of the outbreak was that Seoul, or was that outside of the capital? Because I think for a lot of our members, we're here in London and we think, well, look, it's a 8 million person city, but Seoul is a lot bigger than that, right? And actually even more built up than we are.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a good point. So Seoul is depending on which metrics or where you believe Seoul's sort of borders to end, is anything from 12 million to 20 million in the greater Seoul area. So you would imagine, similar to New York or similar to London, that there might be a lot of cases. But actually, I don't remember the exact number, but it's between 600 and 700 cases have been in Seoul in its entirety. Most of the cases actually came outside of Seoul, in one of Korea's sort of 3rd, 4th cities. And that was actually picked up by the BBC, and it was due to a cult that actually the leader's brother died, and a lot of the followers came from China and brought COVID, and then it blew up. So those cities actually went on lockdown, but not Seoul itself. So I think contextualizing this, you've got to remember that Seoul has had a very limited exposure to this. And if you then say, well, how can it have stayed that limited when all it would have taken is people to go from that 3rd or 4th city and travel back to the capital? Well, I mean, the strategy was very important. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that Korea instituted what are now termed the sort of 3 T's, and you'll be hearing a lot about this, I think, in the UK. But so testing, tracing, and then treating. So I mean, it's self-evident what that is, but you can think of it, to give you an example of one of our own staff. She went to a hospital, and it turned out that hospital the day before had a COVID case, and it was it was just a regular sort of clinic. And because she had been there the day after the person had gone to that hospital, the following day she had to be tested, and the day after that she got the result. So, and she was just one of however many hundreds were in that hospital the following day after the case had been found. And so when you consider that degree of testing and tracing and then finding the people and then getting them in to be tested, and ultimately if she had tested positive, she would have been then treated, you can see the level of detail by which the Korean government is managing this. And it goes in this, the picture here just gives you an example of the app that's available, and it's both in English and in Korean. And this has been instituted from the very beginning, and that's because of, you know, primarily Korea's experience with other diseases in the past. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the level of testing. I mean, this is very, very evident, and obviously Italy, for obvious reasons, now has performed a lot of tests. Germany had that as a very early strategy, but you know, Korea, and in terms of its testing, has done very, very well, and well ahead of the United Kingdom. Although I think the UK now is buying more and instituting more testing. Next one. It's just an example of the way things were done here. So again, you know, I've seen pictures in the UK where there just isn't the PPE nor the systems created yet by which to do, you know, really strong, safe testing, and Korea built this system. So essentially a phone booth by which you enter in one end, and then there is no cross-contamination possible as that person is tested. So just an example of what the institute.
Well,
okay, so then what does this mean for our members? It's pretty bad. So now the first thing that people might say is, well, Korea then was never on lockdown, so surely it was not that bad. We are, and I'm sure Gordon will talk about it as well, we're effectively in week 9, 10 of a slow burn kind of lockdown and severe social distancing. And so whilst the effect hasn't been as sudden as it has been in the UK or the US or other countries, particularly in Europe, it's been very gradual and very demanding, very tough on businesses. So you can see that even though you know, this was taken actually maybe 3 weeks ago, you know, you can see that no one's been not affected, and then some have been slightly affected, but the vast majority have been significantly affected, with some moderate. And we're actually doing a new survey this week, and I would imagine these numbers will be even more damning. So it's been tough. Next slide. So what does that mean in terms of how the business affected? Again, this will be rerun next week, and I can share those, but revenue is at least down by 10%, and that's revenue expected to be down for the year by 10%. And so this is gonna, you know, it's gonna be worse than that, but this has certainly been very bad for British businesses, and that includes startups, mid-sized companies, and also larger organizations. So next slide. So what have they done to deal with this? I think all of these are very similar to what's happening in the UK. So I think no reason to really dwell on this, but as you can imagine, it began with travel, and then it's affected cash flows, and now actually human resources, where people are effectively, you know, having to be laid off in some cases. Okay, next one. So how long are things going to take to recover? You can see here that, you know, some are more positive than others, but, you know, we think that in terms of accepted time to recover from a business perspective, not a public health perspective, 6 months. And we already in Asia, we believe that probably we're 2 months at least ahead of where Europe is, or the US, in terms of that recovery. So you can imagine, you know, public health recovery. So that means, you know, this year is going to be very difficult to recover this year. So we're expecting negative growth in the region. Measures taken to offset. Again, these I don't think are particularly surprising and similar in the UK, but I mean, the reality is now that you know, the game has changed, and people are completely altering budgets, strategies. When it comes to startups, you know, investments, they're just not happening. When it comes to acquisitions, they're all stalled. And so whilst people are returning to offices, and people are returning to sort of quote unquote work, you know, most things are basically in a state of pause. That goes for international exports as well, particularly from the sort of SME side. Okay, next. So again, these are some of the things that our members are doing, which might be pertinent to you and not to others. We're seeing now teams being split up, A team and B team coming in, A on a Monday, B on a Tuesday. Daily check-ins, a lot more, obviously, social distance is still happening within the workforce. There's been a supply of masks, you know, pretty much from the beginning, and sometimes by companies themselves. And I think companies are going back to basic on building brand rather than, you know, expanding or seeking to market too much, because there's no footfall
Yeah.
for a lot of the B2C businesses. And so these are just some examples of things that they're doing. But I think most of these now are being instituted also in the UK. So
yeah.
So yes, I think that's the last slide. Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's great, Sean. Thank you very much. And I think amazing just to put that into context and see, you know, how well the government did, and certainly some of the things that stick out for me are that the level of testing and the rapidness of the response and just the thoroughness of it all. I don't know if anyone else on this call has ever tried to get a test in the UK. Certainly, you know, if you make it, certainly a few weeks ago, if you made a couple of phone calls, you were very, very promptly told in most cases that there would be no tests available. So certainly I can see huge differences there. This is the final slide you finished on is probably a sort of a good start to tee us up into chatting a little bit more about the I guess the business side of things, and this is probably a good time to get Gordon in to talk a little bit about I guess what the effect has been on companies and what their sort of response has been, and I'd certainly love to hear from you, Gordon, how it's affected your company and the way of doing business.
Sure. I mean, I think partially of what Sean mentioned about how it's been a gradual start for us in Korea. That really just means that we're now looking at already compounded impacts of several months. So where some of our clients were experiencing cuts in the supply chain as Chinese production shut down in February, that of course now then leads to them having difficulties doing their manufacturing in Korea, which then makes it difficult then to export. Of course, even if they were able to do so, then where they're exporting to in the developed markets, then that's also incredibly difficult, if not impossible. So in some sense, it's been a kind of building momentum of effects that have come about. You know, we're specializing on the HR side of things. What that means for most companies is hiring freezes. I saw a very good list that was being compiled. It was kind of crowdsourced online by a company called Candor, who are just literally putting together a list of all the companies which have put on global hiring freezes in order to just try to spread that information about current situation. And then, of course, when it comes to just actual business operations, so there's been this denomination of what is essential, what is not essential, and that's different country by country. But they're companies who are, of course, are having to go down to skeleton staff to keep their operations going. That it's then compounded into having to actually initiate unpaid leave if they're actually stopping the operations. And so this is really just becoming an even greater problem across some sectors. Fortunately, in our business, we do touch many different sectors in our client base, and so that allowed us to see that there were some sectors which, of course, were affected very quickly, directly from the effects back in February, and there's others who are now as kind of tertiary suppliers or other industries which are only now beginning to feel an effect and with a much longer lag time. So really now, finally, it's really leaving not one single sector significantly affected now.
Yeah. So I guess on that note, you spoke about the sort of none of the all the sectors being affected. I guess one of the things we've seen in London, even in the first few weeks, is obviously some sectors being absolutely obliterated and having going from, you know, very successful companies to just simply not having any customers or being having to close down completely, whilst other sectors that potentially we may not have anticipated, such as, you know, home exercise equipment and things like that, actually growing really strongly. As you're sort of a couple of months in, how you know, what has been the effect on the businesses there in South Korea? Are there any particular sectors that you've seen sort of really grow strongly, and conversely, you know, what's happened to those sectors, such as the event sectors and the others? Are they all still completely on hold, or where are they at now?
So of course, there definitely have been some specific sectors who have been able to benefit from the conditions of people working from home, and other such. I saw that food delivery companies were up 90%. Home appliance sales were up over 30% year on year. An interesting one also, which is a particular popular pastime here, which is in Korea, maybe more so than in the UK, mobile gaming, and also animation, so webtoons. They are also an area which have gone up more than 50%. So there are, you know, those are the sectors which are, you know, experiencing growth and trying to hire more people. But at the same time, there are the sectors who are just desperately trying to get hold of any kind of rescue funds which they can, in order to try to mitigate some of their cash flow problems.
Yeah. And you earlier, Sean, and this is one for you, and then maybe Gordon can weigh it in as well. Sean, you spoke about I guess the offices were still open, or were open now. And I guess from our perspective, we've seen the death rate, I guess, come down in recent days. We know we're on lockdown for at least a couple more weeks, but we would probably expect that the next phase, be it in a couple of weeks or in 5 or 6 weeks, would be that as the social distance comes down, that maybe there's a partial return to being able to attend the offices. What are your members and what companies having to do in order to make the offices workable? I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, you know, if we consider this to be week, you know, 8 or 9, depending on when you pick the time, bear in mind that so Korea has never had the level of patients, has never had the level of deaths in the UK, and also has never had a lockdown, and yet basically instituted pretty severe social distancing measures, probably about let's say 8 weeks ago. So then what were those measures? I mean, basically it recommended companies to send their staff home unless it was essential to keep them. So that was the measure prior to the UK's lockdown. So the UK's kind of already done a bit of that. Then it didn't really institute anything else other than that, other than to say public events should not be run, and therefore people just started to slowly stop their events. And then it quickly moved to, you know, public events in terms of sports and things like that. But I mean, and it started to react to incoming visitors from overseas. But shops have never been closed. People have never been told forcibly that they have to work from home. And there hasn't been anywhere near the, you know, the sort of demands on not moving around. So no one's checking where you're going in your car. No one's stopping you from entering certain locations. And yet, you know, still we're 8 weeks into this. So I think what we have now is people coming back to the office, and they are coming back and they are trying to work. The reality is that Korea is a heavily export-based economy, and a lot of that work is connected to the global economy. So there's very little that a lot of people can do. So I think the first step that will happen in the UK, I guess, is that after the 3 weeks or 2-3 weeks, there will be a sort of transition into where Korea was 8 weeks ago. And let's say that the UK does do it as successfully as Korea does, which I doubt because for lots of reasons. That's a further 8 weeks. So you're talking now 11 weeks to get maybe to where we are. And I'm telling you that where we are is still a pretty tough place, meaning the effectiveness of getting work done is still very difficult. We're in the office, we're still not having external meetings, we're having no external events. And it's very hard just to basically get really business done and also to get sales back and B2B businesses functioning. So the message, I guess, is it gets better, but it will take time. So I would say that anyone in the UK that should be really adapting their business as quickly as possible to this new norm, because you're probably 3, 4, 5 months out from any possible big return to where we were in terms of behavior. Yeah. So.
Okay. And Gordon, maybe you could weigh in there on your thoughts as well on what is happening amongst the companies that you're working with. And in terms of, I'm keen to also understand as maybe some of the practicalities and what people are having to do from a management perspective, because I guess some people will really not want to come back into the office, and I think you have to sort of work with your employees and try and put in safeguards in place to I guess tackle some of those issues. Is it a case of hand sanitizers at the desk? How do you keep your employees socially distancing, whereas previously they may have sat opposite or next to these people? I'd love to hear what sort of initial thoughts you might have, or what's been going on with your guys.
Sure. So I think that's a good point, because what doesn't necessarily always make the news, the amounts of testing makes the news, or the way in which technology is being used. But I would say actually one of the most significant things which is kind of affecting everybody in Korea for the last few months, every single day and everywhere you go, is that for every building you enter, every place you go, especially with the office or anywhere where there's people gathering, is that there is masks are obligatory, and that there is also temperature testing. Furthermore than that, in some buildings, you are also asked to sign a disclaimer saying things that you have not come into contact with any COVID cases, you have not traveled to China, you have, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some of the day-to-day things which companies themselves and building managers are having to do in order to kind of function. And that's, I guess, in some ways put it at the front of everyone's minds that although Seoul was not really an epicenter of a large number of cases, still in every place that you went and everywhere you go, you had to go through these measures. And so that, I think, was very significant to just make sure that everybody is keeping to the advisory rules such as social distancing. Now, when it comes to specifically what are companies doing, I've seen some companies in their canteens, their staff restaurants, putting in literally table dividers. So a table of 4, previously everybody sitting together. Now there's dividing the table into 4 individual seats, so people are not so close. We've also seen other companies just in their open space, if they're doing actual open plan type of work style, then every other seat is being made to be kept vacant. So again, people maintaining that kind of distancing. So there's some kind of practical things that companies are also having to do in order to keep working as much as they can.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And I guess looking at that from the other perspective of most of us here are now, I guess, isolating at home and remotely managing our teams. From the perspective of you guys having been through, working from home for the majority of this period, any best practice or tips for managing your teams and how do you keep and keeping morale up and effective management over this period? And I think let's go to you first, Sean.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, some of the things that are certainly being reported from our members, for example, I think, I know that one company essentially instituted that all calls that are more than, you know, just a very quick functional call need to be done by webinar and face-to-face, and that's internal calls and also as much as possible with their clients. I think, you know, for me, I'm instituting a quick catch-up with each of our senior members, which is all done by video call. So I think definitely more higher frequency of contact on paper. So typically I wouldn't call them every 10 days, but we are, and we're looking to do that on video. So that, you know, because you cannot, you have to try to substitute what would usually be interactions done because of the level of business is simply reduced. Then, you know, others are telling me that, you know, as well as doing in functional meetings or calls through Zoom or something else, they're also trying to do, you know, different staff related events. So either some sort of quiz or they're doing some sort of gathering. I heard one of our members was creating a Friday afternoon sort of beer time where everyone logs in with their beer and just chats about the week. So I'm sure that these things are starting to happen in the UK. The other thing that they're doing is now Korea is slowly, you know, returning to the office. It's not a sudden change from everyone at home to everyone back in the office. As Gordon said, they're sort of instituting a separation period or a separation distance in the office. So either Group A is coming in, but then Group A is still making an effort to have calls with Group B. And so I think what you're seeing now is the reality is that people have more time because the general function of business is reduced. They're over the initial period of just being slightly shocked by what COVID has done. Now they're instituting, essentially replacing what is empty time with you know, function of trying to keep morale, because during this period, the challenge, of course, some companies may be in a position where they need to reduce their staff, but also you want to keep up the motivation of the ones that have always been motivated. So I think they're just instituting more frequency of contact. I don't know if Gordon has other examples.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, very interesting to hear that feedback from some senior managers feeling that this period of remote working has been the best possible time they ever could have asked for. They feel that their teams are more efficient, more productive, that they've got rid of unnecessary meetings and things are going better than they ever could have. On the other hand, I'm also hearing from other senior executives that this is the worst possible situation. Their operations have ground to a halt. They're not able to get things done. They're in constant, you know, their kind of email traffic has kind of trebled, and they're just kind of, you know, under an avalanche of unnecessary communication. So, you know, what can we take away from that? Clearly, some companies prepared better than others, and perhaps this is where it really leaves the difference between larger and multinational companies and smaller startups or SMEs. Of course, multinational companies will have the technological infrastructure already in place. They will have already been using that globally to keep their business running. And that's just ways of working that perhaps startups and SMEs don't have within their company, within their business. So something that they have to kind of start from scratch. But on the other hand, they have an agility, they have a smaller size, you know, nimbleness, which allows them to move quickly. So perhaps they can also take advantage of the latest cutting edge technology to be able to kind of win some advantages. So a lot of kind of conflicting situations for companies, depending on the type of business they're doing and the size of their organization. And I think just to echo into what Sean said in terms of managing people, regular check-ins is the key. You know, if you are in an office environment, there's going to be you know, dozens of interactions every day, which you don't plan or schedule. Now, if you're in a separated remote location, you've got to actually schedule for those. And so that's just important to keep visibility and everybody on the same page so that you're clearly focused towards the objectives, which might be different objectives than before, considering the new situation.
Yeah. And in terms of the new normal, so the new normal, you know, what is the situation now in Korea, or what is the current guidance for you guys on how long you expect this next period of sort of you know, still not having business meetings? I presume it's still quite difficult to go for a beer with your co-workers, or you know, what you know, how long is this next phase do you anticipate?
So personally, I think we've actually entered a new era, which is different, and that we won't ever fully go back to how things were before. If we talk about international business travel, I think people are going to very seriously consider, you know, is it worth me traveling around the world for 1 day of meetings, 2 days of meetings, when now, having experienced the technology which allows them to work effectively. So I think there are certain things which have changed and will not go back to how they were before. Effects of that, of course, you know, we might see in some sense less global mobility, more localization of positions. If people are feeling that there's not so much easy international travel, then they're going to be looking domestically for that kind of talent to play that gap. On the other hand, since we have now had a much more comforting and acclimatization to being able to work digitally and virtually, we actually find that there can be more ways of working globally without having barriers of having to be there physically. So I think, again, some big changes which won't necessarily ever return to how things were before. And that will be, you know, a so-called new way of working, I think.
Yeah. And Sean, and obviously similar to myself and the Entrpreneurs Collective, you host a similar sort of events on a lot larger scale with the Chamber of Commerce. What is the anticipation for you guys going forward? Is it keeping the events online, or what would be the next stage? Is there a way to do networking and events while social distancing?
Yeah, so I think you know, so I think first of all, you know, what you're doing, Michael, and reacting in by holding these webinars, I think is basically the only thing that can be done for anyone that's running any type of event or networking function. Obviously, it's very hard to network over this medium, so it's more about the provision of content, but it still brings value, if not networking. So that's the first thing we're doing. So we've now got 2 to 3 webinars per week at the moment, and I think that, you know, things will get better. So I suspect that sometime in June, maybe late June, we'll be able to do offline events again to some degree, which will probably be largely heavily restricted around the numbers relative to the square footage, you know, of the space and all kinds of things. So I don't think major events will come back, but maybe events of 20 or 30. And so we look forward to that. So what we've done is prepared a set of events that will happen at the moment that we can institute that, because I think people outside are craving to network and to meet people. I mean, the basic point is that people are lonely, and I think they're feeling that that it's very important to meet others in order to do business, despite, you know, as Gordon mentioned, some of the changes in how business might be done. You can't really substitute the fact that you can meet people in person. So we have those ready in the midterm. In the short term, we're working on providing value through webinars. In terms of the going forward for the rest of the year, as I mentioned, I think it's pretty gloomy in terms of what can be done on events. So the reality is that even the function of networking itself is going to take some time to come back. So for example, we do a lot of events like you do, which involve a beer and people mingling. You know, our big event, which should have been in May, was pushed to June, is now been pushed to July, will involve no real networking. So we actually switched it from what is essentially a celebration and charity gala to a business awards event. Why have we done that? Business awards don't really need mingling. Also, at the moment, companies need some good news they're not going to sponsor things that involve people heavily getting close to each other, exchanging cards, breathing near each other, all that risk. And so actually what we're doing from an events perspective is short term, a different channel, mid-term, ready to move when we can, and then on the larger sort of formats, essentially readapting, because if we don't do that, I think we risk running events that simply will be very ill-attended until things change. So I think that's the reality of what we're doing now. It means that this year I think we'll contract in terms of revenue and scale, but it'll be more effective. So I think that's probably what people will be assessing now in the UK as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Sean. That is great. I will now open it up to the audience to ask some questions. So please do either put your hand up or send them through to the chat. I have one that's come in already. The question being, why do you think the South Korean government was so much more effective than the UK has been? Who would like to have a go at that? Sean? Yeah, very good.
Okay, so I'm conscious that you're recording this, so I presume it's for public consumption when I speak about any government. So I'll be cautious in what I say in terms of comparisons, but I think I'm not sure that I mean, obviously the performance on the outside looking in looks a lot, you know, quote unquote better, but the circumstances are completely different. So what I mean by that is, this is a market that has been used to these types of, whether it was SARS or MERS, was aware of these types of issues. They had systems in place to deal with it. The awareness of what will happen in the event of this being mishandled was already very evident. You know, measures were put in place to be able to react quickly, and Korea did it. So I think that's one thing to bear in mind, that the frame by which that we're judging these governments is different. That's not to say that, you know, any mistakes or lack of preparedness by the British government ought to be forgiven in that light, but nonetheless, there is a context importance here. And the second thing is, honestly, not all of the success of the Korean case is down to the government. So a lot of it is to do with the civic responsibility of the people. And I kid you not, the moment that the Korean government said, let's have social distancing as a recommendation, it was almost as if they'd instituted it heavily in law. There were no doubt about the fact that people were going to wear masks. Nobody was going to really break it. You know, there's never been a fine in Korea, other than actually, I think recently for a foreigner. So actually a Brit, I think. But anyway, so there is also that non-governmental part, which really worked well here, which is that civic sort of group mentality of, if we need to do something, we're going to do it. And so I think the government has been helped by that. In the UK, I think after what seems to be like certainly a shaky start, is catching up and doing better. But of course, you know, they're struggling in the sense that the equipment needed now is being sought all over the world. And I know that Korea now is a heavy exporter also to the UK of the equipment needed. So it seems that things will get better, but yeah, so I think that's two sort of things to bear in mind when judging that question. I don't know, maybe Gordon has some other thoughts.
Yeah.
Nothing particular to add on that one.
Yeah. Okay. This one's for you, Gordon.
Okay.
So, in terms of your members, I guess many companies have been 8 to 10 weeks into the lockdown or working from home. How have you seen the mental health of employees being impacted by working from home, and what are companies doing to address that?
Well, I guess on the face of it, it's very difficult to measure mental health state. You know, most companies do their employee engagement surveys on an annual basis. So in terms of, you know, kind of official data, there's not a whole lot out there yet. But interestingly, we did see on the first week where work from home status was basically kind of the default for all major companies. On that first day, the largest chat messenger here in Korea, which is called Kakao Talk, so it's basically Korea's version of WhatsApp. That chat app actually crashed for several hours, and so this was basically everybody being at work from home status and converting their kind of conversations, whether those are social or work, onto this chat app. So you could definitely see that the nature of relationships has changed. For those of you who haven't had the chance to visit Korea, Korea does business very much on a relationship basis, and so a lot of doing business is about meeting people, having dinner with people, drinking with business associates. And that has essentially stopped and continues to be almost not occurring. And so I think there will definitely be, definitely a kind of build-up of tension when it comes to people feeling that they are kind of restricted in their way. Maybe that we can look at some of the headlines where unfortunately there's been a spike in domestic violence, which has gone up, and I think that's not just Korea, that's other countries as well, as people have been at home and not able to be out and about. So that's definitely one of the more negative aspects which has come out in recent times.
Okay, great. Okay, and a question here from Katie MacDonald. She wants to know, in terms of the businesses that you've been working with, Sean, what are they doing to, I guess, give benefits to employees during this period to try and, I guess, keep them happy? Certainly, I know from a personal experience, obviously, we would, regularly have after-work events. You might have meals, you might have drinks, or there may be employee benefits such as gym membership or things like that. But certainly, a lot of these benefits are no longer applicable. What have you seen your members do, or what have you guys been doing to try and keep the team together?
So I think there's two things. One is, the economic situation here. So again, it's a little different to the UK, because the UK stepped in and followed a lot of staff and sort of kept people from essentially, going to the job center. So job security is okay for now, it seems, but I'm sure not everywhere. But Korea is a little different. So that didn't really come at all. It took several weeks to institute anything similar to that, and it comes with a lot of different caveats. So actually, think of it in this way. I think staff, the way the benefits were given were more about the flexibility of the working. So either, choosing to let them work from home because it was not constituted by the government, and then, flexible working hours to allow them to avoid, rush hour and things like that. The other thing is, of course, anyone that, was worried about being sick, or, all these things were just extremely quickly given to staff to tell them, go and be checked and make sure that you're comfortable and that everyone in your family's comfortable. But the main thing I think that people are looking for at the moment is actually job security. So the biggest thing that companies are doing at the moment, certainly in areas, in verticals of the market where they're struggling, is trying to assure people that they're going to come out of this with their jobs in place. And so what does that mean? That means that, there's been cost cutting. And there's been, the main thing is there has to be transparency. So I think what our members have been doing is, and I guess, you have a bunch of founders amongst your membership. The biggest thing is transparency on where the business is, how the business is dealing with this, the steps that the business can take in order to mitigate some of the problems. If you're going to, apply for some of the government programs, what does that mean in the short term for the position, the liquidity of the company? What does that mean for their job? So I think the first thing is, rather than, let's say, giving free subscriptions of Netflix, the first thing has been, okay, let's make sure that they feel secure in their job. The second thing has been, then once they do, then let's make sure that they're mentally happy. So I know members of ours have provided free access to mental health professionals. They've certainly obviously pushed their HR to keep in contact with people. And I think other than that, especially people that have kids and such, they've been very, very flexible in how they are performing their duties at work. So I think rather than, offer those sort of other added benefits, which are easier to do when things are offline, I think they've sort of gone back to basics, at least amongst most of our members. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sean. One last question, and I think we'll go to Con, who's raised his hand. Daniel, could you unmute Con so that he could ask his question?
Morning, evening, everybody. Fascinating, and a fascinating cultural contrast with the UK. Because it's been my business for many years, South Korea is one of the biggest moviegoer markets in the world. And in the last 10 years or so, South Korean productions have been hugely important. And this would have been the banner year for South Korea, with Parasite also winning the Oscars. Can the business recover from the entertainment side of people visiting the cinema and from the physical production side, which is hugely important in Korea?
And who is that directed to, or are you open to both?
It's just general about the guys obviously living and working in South Korea.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, the sound wasn't super good. So from what I understand, you're asking about the domestic film production industry and then how that might recover. Okay. So I think the first thing to bear in mind is that the obvious logistical implications, negative implications caused by the virus, which are happening all over the world, is stopping a lot of production of media, right? In Korea, it's no different, but I would say that it's obviously going to come back quicker than it did in the rest of the world. So I think Korea will be back quicker. That's one thing. The second thing is, are people at the cinema? Well, no, but they've never been formally closed either. And so there's been a sort of small trickle of it. That's another thing to bear in mind. So maybe not as damaged as, let's say, I would assume Hollywood production right now, or even production in London. Yet the other thing is that the production companies here are absolutely massive. They belong to what's termed the chaebols, which is, effectively 30 companies that constitute about 60% of Korea's GDP. So they have deep pockets. They are, pretty cash rich. And the production companies are often the affiliated arms of bigger businesses that help to prop up their production businesses. So I would imagine, actually, more than other markets, Korea has reasons to believe that, it will keep growing in that area, particularly because a lot of their strength comes actually from the Asian market. So if Asia recovers quicker, then actually their distribution and their purchasing will be back before, let's say, a London or a Hollywood. So I think not maybe a bit of a pause, but not a decline expected. But I'm not a specialist on that.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think we'll stop the questions there. I think we're running a little bit over time, but certainly I concur with Con. It's been fascinating to hear the Korean experiment. So thank you very much to both Sean and Gordon. Daniel, if you could move on to the next slide. So just to chat through a couple of our sponsors who helped us put on these events. So firstly, we have Buzzercots, who are an accountancy company that are sponsoring us, as well as giving accountancy advice. They also specialize in areas that are very relevant to some of our members, such as R&D and general accounting advice. In terms of the recent announcements that we have coming out about the UK Future Fund, we will be working with Buzzercots to come up with some advice on that. Do we have Cliff on the line from Buzzercots? Daniel, if you can unmute Cliff if he's still here. No, maybe not. Okay, I think it might have popped off. If we could move on to next. So, Ritam, are you there from Studio Graphene? And maybe you could say a few words about your...
Indeed.
Perfect.
Yeah,
thanks, Ritam.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So, a bit about Studio Graphene. We started almost 6 years ago. And the premise being that we wanted to bring ideas to life. So we work with a range of startups, helping take them from kind of blank canvas stage to design their product, provide the product management, build, etc., on an interdisciplinary basis. We also work with corporates and the corporate innovation space. You know, you've seen some brands here, Coca-Cola, etc. Basically, helping them behave like startups and bring new ideas to life. So we've launched a number of ventures in partnership with corporates and startups. We're also building our own IP and things like reusable components, a product called Define to help people create the definition and specification for an idea that they have, but it's all centered around bringing ideas to life from a kind of blank canvas stage.
Okay, great. And we have a workshop coming up with you guys.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully next week, right, Mike?
Yes, 30th of April.
Exactly. So should I give a bit of background on that?
Yeah, just a 15 seconds, 30 seconds on.
Okay.
Great.
15 seconds. So it's a quick workshop to, obviously over the last 5-6 years, we've got a distributed team all employed by Studio Graphene, but across India, Portugal, Switzerland, well, one developer in Switzerland, and the UK. And you know, so we've had you know, years of experience kind of working on a distributed basis. Obviously, they're not in offices at the moment, but we've got some great tips around that, and would love to share that with you next week.
Yeah. Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Ritam. Finally, our sponsor, Seven Legal, and Bill Coogan. Bill, are you around? I think he was on earlier. He may have nipped off. No, maybe not. Okay. Bill is a legal and HR consultancy, and he supports a number of our startups. And I've only ever heard great things about him. So if you guys do need some help in that area, please do reach out and I can introduce you guys. Daniel, if we can move on to the final slide. We have pulled together a resource pack of guidance, notes, tools, free tools, tips, all these different things that can help yourselves during this period. They will be distributed in the email that we circulate along with these materials at the end of the event. In terms of our next events that we have got coming up, obviously the future fund that was announced yesterday is huge news for the startup community. We are working with a number of advisors and experts in this area to get together some guidance on this. So the aim is that we will try and pull something together fairly quickly as this guidance comes out from the Innovate UK and also British Banking, and then we will look to get back to you guys and get an event in the diary over the next week and get some real expert advice to you guys. In the meantime, once again, I'd love to thank our guest speakers. It's a real pleasure to have such knowledgeable speakers on our event, and really interesting to hear how their response over there has varied from ours. So thank you very much, and I will see you all hopefully at the next event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.